Are you frustrated with your small group reading time? Or maybe you don't do small group reading instruction. Don't worry, no judgment here if you don't. Small group reading instruction can be a tricky and sometimes overwhelming thing to navigate, much less figure out how to fit into an already packed literacy block. Whether you haven't done small groups, or you're frustrated with your small groups, or you've done them and abandoned them because it wasn't working, it's never too late in the year to start or refine a small group reading time. I promise it can be so rewarding and so beneficial to your students. We just have to get it structured so that it's manageable for you and your students know just what to do. So today, let's talk small group reading instruction. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5. And this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Are you missing out? Team H.O.P.E Insiders get extra encouragement, tips and tricks, surprise freebies, and more. Become a H.O.P.E Insider today and get access to all kinds of freebies at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. I know that small group reading instruction is not always as easy as it sounds. In fact, it can be really tricky if you don't set things up correctly. So let's dive into small group reading instruction and my structure for making it successful. Well, before you do anything else, you have to structure your literacy block. Now, I know that not all literacy blocks are created equal, and they can vary drastically from one year to the next simply because schedules change. I've taught some years where my literacy block was this wonderful 2-hour block of time, and we had tons of time to do everything that we needed all at once. I've also had literacy blocks that were broken up throughout the day, whether it's half hour, 45-minute increments, and sometimes you don't have 2 hours. Sometimes you have an hour or an hour and a half for your literacy block. And that's all the time that you have because there's so much that you're required to teach. So knowing that, first we have to structure your literacy block into the most efficient way that we can, and knowing that your literacy block might look different than someone else's, and it might look different than it will next year. But we want to have some sort of a structure to begin with. Now, we always have some whole group reading time. This is where you're introducing students to not only books, but we're talking about phonics and general strategies and skills for reading. This is your chance to teach the whole class the same skills and strategies that they're going to need to be successful readers. Now, I like to begin this time, or if not, then I begin the day, depending on where it fits in, with phonics. I do 10 to 15 minutes of phonics instruction. I do not use worksheets. It's all oral. We use whiteboards and markers so that students are answering, showing me their answer. It's quick, it's fast, and then we get in and we get out. However you do your phonics instruction, make it quick. If you belabor the point, they will not understand. You want them to use it and to use it quickly and understand it, and then you need to get on with your reading instruction. If you're spending an hour or half an hour on phonics instruction, you're belaboring the point and your students are going to miss it. There's much better use of your time in actually applying those phonics to their reading. Then you want to talk about small group instruction, independent work, partner work, all of that practice time. This is where practice comes in. There's no new learning during this time. This is practicing things that you've taught, whether you just taught it that day or you've been teaching it for a while or you're doing review. This is where students will do word work. They will be reading. They might be partner reading, independent reading. They might be listening to stories and following along. There's lots of different ways to structure this independent time. So what will this time look like? Will you have a small group going while students are working independently or in partners? Will students be working at their seat and working on seat work? Will your students be working on stations or centers while you're with the students, other students in a small group? What will that time look like? Will it change each day? Will you do more than one group during that time, or will you only do one group a day? These are decisions that you can make along the way, but start thinking about that. You will need time between groups if you do more than one group, or after the group that you're doing, to pause and help any students with any problems that they're having, and then helping them switch activities. And then I like a little wrap up or cleanup time for the whole group. We talk about how it went. Do we have any struggles? Are there things that we need to work on to be able to make this go better? And then I usually move into a writing time. We do writing time whole group, and then they work individually or with a partner on a writing task. And during this time is when I am working with students individually. Sometimes I might pull a small group if there's something specific that they're struggling with in writing, but most of the time I'm conferring individually with students throughout this time. Okay, here's the next big piece: classroom management. Your classroom management has to be impeccable for small group time to work. We have to train our students to work independently, and that means that we have to train our students and build their stamina to read independently as well. We need students to have a sense of urgency. We need students to have a sense of urgency and ownership about their own learning and how important it is. They need to own it, and it takes time to build this. You're not going to jump in the beginning of the school year or any time of year and just start small group teaching. It doesn't work. You have to train your students to be able to work independently and what to do if they need help, when they can get up and get supplies, what are your systems for doing those kinds of things. Can they allowed to get up and get a drink and then go back to work? Are they allowed to go to the restroom and then come back without asking you, just putting something on their desk and signing out so you know where they're at? What are they allowed to do during this time? What are the parameters? You need to work on appropriate voice levels. Is this a silent time? Is this a quiet time? Are they whispering? Can they work with partners? You need to work on all of those pieces if those are things you're going to allow. I also like to have a signal for students to give to a talkative neighbor. How often do you have students who are working diligently and a student nearby or next to them keeps talking to them and interrupting them and bothering them, and they get so frustrated, and then they're coming to you and complaining and interrupting your small group time, or they're yelling at the student to stop and disrupting the whole class. I can't tell you how many times I've had that happen to me, and I've seen it in other teachers' classrooms. You are not alone. It happens. I like 2 fingers over their mouth, and they can look at their friend, and it just tells their friends, hey, I like you, but I'm not allowed to talk right now. So they aren't saying a word. It's just 2 fingers over their mouth. They can look at their neighbor and keep those fingers over their mouth and continue working. And then they can take their fingers away, keep on going. If that student is still bothering them, they can give them the signal again. And if it happens after a 3rd time, hopefully you've noticed by this point. But if you have not, then you need a way for them to be able to let you know that they're having a struggle with this and it needs to stop. And usually this means that you need to stop everything, stop the whole class, have a chat, and retrain. I think sometimes we're so focused on getting things done and finishing that we let behavior issues slide or go on longer than we should. And the reality is we were better served, and our students are better served by us stopping, retraining, and getting that piece right so that the rest of the year and the weeks and months ahead will go so much smoother. So never be afraid to stop and just retrain. Sometimes you got to do it. It might feel frustrating, but the only way to stop those behaviors is really to do a retraining at that point. But if you train your students well in the first place and you have that signal, usually that's enough to let another student know, whoops, I need to go back to work. Then there's no hurt feelings. Everybody knows that this is not personal. This is just work time. So take the time to build reading stamina. Take the time to build all your systems out and really train your students before you start that small group time. You also need a way for students to be able to let you know that they need help. There's lots of systems out there on Pinterest and Instagram, and they're fabulous. Whether it's a clip system that they can put a clip with their name or number on it onto a board so that you know who's next and they can just wait in line that way. Then they can go back to their seat and get to work. You can have something else for them to do, or you can continue working on whatever it is that they can while they're waiting for you to help, knowing that you will not get to them until you're done with that small group. So they need to decide, can I keep on going or do I need to work on something different? But having some sort of a list where they sign their name or put a clip where they clip their name into line one after the other when they need help, this is helpful because then they can go back and get back to work and not be standing in line at your desk hovering over you while you're trying to teach in a small group. Next, you need to plan for groups. What do you teach in a small group? I get this question a lot. How do you group your students? Well, I would say first you need to decide what are your students' needs. You need to start with some objectives of what are you trying to accomplish in these small groups. If you're not clear on what it is that you want to accomplish, then you won't accomplish anything. It will just be a waste of your time and your students' time. Yes, you might get some fun little things done, and that's nice and all, but don't waste everybody's time. Really, you want them to be focused and very productive time for your students to be able to hone in on specific skills. So, the entire point of small group reading instruction is helping your students to read and comprehend better, to apply what you've been teaching them so they can move forward and improve. Even if they're already great readers, there's always room to learn more. So small groups are appropriate regardless of the student's level. It's not just for students who are struggling. Some things that you could potentially teach: accuracy and self-correction. Some students just really struggle with being able to self-correct, and this might be what you're teaching during that time. Maybe you're teaching more phonics skills and sight words that they can, and working on applying those phonics skills to their actual reading. So maybe they have good phonics skills in isolation, but they're not applying it to their reading. That could be a small group. That could be the students that can't seem to apply those skills to their reading. You can work on that in their reading. Maybe you need to work on fluency with some students. That might be a small group. You might have students that need vocabulary work or background knowledge. Students who have not been read too much at home, students who are ELLs, or students just really struggle with vocabulary and background knowledge. This can be a group. Do you have some students who need some reinforcement with comprehension? Maybe they need some guided practice with using the comprehension strategies in actual reading as opposed to learning how to do them, but really practicing in a guided reading setting. That is a perfect reason to create a group for a small group study. Now, you might have students that are actually really excelling in reading. You could do a book study with them, go deeper. You could go deeper into strategies and comprehension. You could go deeper in lots of ways, but there's lots of reasons to group students. Don't forget, small group time is the application time. It's time for correction, next steps, things to try to become better readers. That's the whole point. Okay, so next, you'll need to decide how many are in each group. I wouldn't do more than 6 in a group. 5 to 6 tends to be a good size. 4 is even better, but 6 is okay. You can really do a group of 6. You need to know how many groups will you have. I strongly recommend that you don't have more than 5 groups because you have 5 days in the week and some weeks are shorter. So in order for you to get all the groups in, even if all you have is enough time to do 1 group a day, then they get some extra reading help 1 day a week. It's better than nothing. If you can get 2 groups in a day, you might do 2 groups on Tuesday, 2 groups on Wednesday, and 1 group on Thursday. Mondays tend to be holidays quite often, so it's nice to not have anybody on Monday, get your class going, and then you can move through the week and have Friday to kind of make up anything if students miss their group. It gives you some flexibility. If you need to move a group around, you can't get to one during their regular day, that gives you that extra day to kind of move a group to a different day. Or if you have groups that need some extra help, then you have Monday and Friday to kind of fit them in a second time. Optimally, it's great to meet with groups twice a week, but that doesn't always happen in a literacy block. Most people don't have a 2-hour literacy block. Some people do, some people don't. If you don't have a 2-hour literacy block, you're not going to see your groups twice a week. It just isn't going to happen. You don't have enough time to do that. Just know what your constraints are and don't fight it. Go with what you know will work for you, and you can always add in more time. But start with 1 day a week, and then you can go from there. How long will you meet with your groups? If you're meeting for a shorter period of time, then you might be able to get your groups in more often. Will you do 10-minute groups, 15-minute groups, or 20-minute groups? Part of that determination may be based around how long the rest of your class can work independently on a regular basis. Are they good for about 10 minutes? Are they good for 15? If they're good for 10 or 15 minutes, then absolutely you have time to do a 15-minute group. But if they aren't good for 15 minutes, if they can do 10, but more than that they start getting squirrely, then you're going to want to do 10-minute groups. You're going to need to figure out what your class can handle before you decide how long you will meet. And then you can make adjustments to your plan for each group based on that. So now let's talk about prepping for your groups. When you prep for your groups, you want to share your target or your objective with the group. That takes about a minute tops. And then you're going to do reteaching. We do not teach anything new in this group time. You don't have enough time. Your students don't have enough time to practice it. This is review. This is support work. It is not new work. You have 1 to 3 minutes to reteach something. You can use anchor charts, post-it notes with questions, and key points on them, whatever it is that you need to remind yourself of what it is that you're going to be teaching in your group. I like to use a combination of a group planning and recording sheet for each individual group, and then some post-its for specific questions and things I want to make sure that I ask during this time. Finding what works for you, it might take a little bit of trial and error, and that's okay. Be patient with yourself and be willing to change and do something different if it's not working. And then you need 5 to 10 minutes for your students to actually practice and for you to monitor their practice. And then you'll need 1 to 3 minutes to wrap it up, restating your objective, discussing how to use this particular skill or strategy on their own. I love giving students a post-it note or a bookmark that's already pre-printed that gives them all of the cues that they need in order to remember to practice this. Then they can stick it in their book and they have it. And when they come back, then you can collect it if you're changing your objective for them, or they can keep it longer if you're going to keep on with that objective. And then don't forget, you need to have the appropriate materials. Finding books to read in your small group. If your school has not provided sets of books for you, then you're going to need to figure out where you're going to get those. And sometimes we can borrow materials from other classrooms. There's other places where you can get some free materials, especially for very young students, for young readers, kindergarten, first grade. I will link, it's called Hubbard's Cupboard, and I will link it in the show notes. She has wonderful, wonderful books that you can download and print for free. That's a great way to get some materials for the younger kids. There's other ways you can buy materials as well, but remember, you're going to be doing small groups on a regular basis. It's really hard to come up with enough material then, and you want all the students in your group to have the same reading material. Sometimes you have to get creative and you're sharing texts or you're finding texts in other places that you wouldn't think, and I'll try and put some resources in the show notes for you so that you're not spending a ton of money on materials for your small groups. So the next piece is make it fun. You know, when you get busy and you're on the phone or you're working on something, and whether it's at school or at home with your own kids, suddenly everyone's not quite behaving themselves. Well, when my own kids were little, I had a laundry basket of quiet toys that I kept in a cabinet in my kitchen. I cleaned out a cabinet just for this, and I would stick it in the cabinet, and my kids were not allowed to use any of those toys except when I was on the phone. If I was on the phone with an important phone call, that basket came out and they could play with those toys for the duration of my phone call plus 2 extra minutes. So 2 minutes to wrap it up, and then they went right back in that cabinet. So this was super fun. They so looked forward to it. My kids tell me now as they're older, we used to pray that the phone would ring so we could play with those toys, because that's the only time that they saw them. It made them very fun. It wasn't like these toys were super fabulous or special. They were just ones they didn't get to play with hardly ever. So it seemed fabulous and special. So you can make your small group time extra fun and have kids longing to come, not only just for the attention, but because it's fun. You can have fun pointers, you can use smelly markers, you can have a joke or a fun fact. There's all kinds of little things that you can do. Just pick one thing that you're going to do that makes this time extra special for your students when they come to your small group time, especially if you have kids who are reluctant readers. And I know I said 5, but really there's one more. Don't forget to reflect and assess. How is it working and how can you tell? You need to know how things are working and part of it is, how can you tell that things are working, that this small group is making a difference? Well, if students are participating more in class, if they seem like they have more confidence, they're reading with more fluency, they're demonstrating the skills and strategies that you have been reinforcing in that group time, if they're happier to read. And then, of course, there's all of your data and assessments that you regularly do in reading as well. So please think about that. Keep your eyes and ears open. Really collect all of that anecdotal data, but also pay attention to your other data and assessments. Are your students using what you taught in their own reading? Are they applying that learning outside of that small group time? That's really the clincher, isn't it? That's what we want students to do. But if they aren't doing that, then we need to change our tactics and continue refining how we're teaching this so that this small group time is actually effective. There is a quote, and this is not an exact quote, and I, for the life of me, cannot remember who this came from, and I do know it. But basically, it's the only way a child learns to read well is to sit with a book in a quiet space and read. And that is true, and that's great and all, but we have to peel back the layers and reveal the how-to for most of our students to help them learn to really read and comprehend and enjoy reading. It's not always intuitive, and that isn't where our teaching comes in, our whole group teaching, and especially to learning to apply it when they're struggling to apply it in that small group time. So it isn't just going to happen. Yes, we need students to practice and read in a quiet space. Yes, they need to do that in order to become good readers, but they also need some very direct instruction as well. And they need some help and some guidance on applying all of the things that we're teaching them. So I would say that sometimes we make learning to read sound so simple. Read to your kids a lot at home, read to them at school, teach them phonics, give them time to read every day, and they'll magically become readers. Well, good luck with that. There's so much more required of us in order to teach reading, and I don't have to tell you that. All right, so let's do a quick recap. You need to have a structure for your literacy block already in place before you can start small group instruction. Don't forget to get that classroom management under control. Have systems in place and practice so that your students are ready. Plan your groups carefully. Who will be in them? How many students will be in them? When will you teach them? And plan and prep your instruction. Remember, you need to figure out what it is your students need. Before you actually implement small groups, you have to decide what your objective is. What are you trying to accomplish with each and every one of your small groups? And every group's objective might be different. You might have groups for different reasons. You might have the same reason. You might have the same objective for all of your groups sometimes, and other times every group might have different objectives. Make it fun. And don't forget to reflect and assess and make sure that your groups are actually working. If they're not, it's time to refine, change things up, and get it right. All the links to the resources mentioned in this episode are in the show notes on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. You can grab my freebies in the vault. As always, that link is in the show notes as well. So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in. And for all those of you who have taken the time to post a review, email me your thoughts or DM me on Instagram with your feedback and topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in the episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.